And now I don't buy kosher meat, and I 99.9% of the time do not mix dairy and meat. But we eat out anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Shirley, what about you?
Chose not to keep kosher.
Oh, sorry, Bill. Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of Jews are similar. The conservative Jews, they're very similar to what you described.
Yeah.
Shirley?
I grew up in Brooklyn in what I assume was a kosher home by immersion. I remember my mother had our Passover dishes in a closet in a corner. Not that there were many of them, but she tried. There was absolutely no mixing of meat and dairy at all, ever. And then we moved to Parsippany, and then we moved to Succothana. And I guess we never really had two sets of dishes other than for Passover. For Passover, we were very strict.
Yeah.
And when Stu's grandmother was alive, we would make sure that we had kosher food if she came to visit us. And then Stu and I solved the problem by being vegetarians for 20 years. That was the simplest way and the most observant way we could do it without going absolutely crazy. So.
And you still are vegetarian?
No, you don't know that story? When I had back surgery about 5 years ago, I came home from the hospital and I was still a vegetarian. And
I recall now, yeah.
What do you want for lunch? A roast beef sandwich. And that was the end of that.
Right.
But we still don't eat pork or shellfish at all.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know why, but that's what we do.
We'll find out.
They know why, but we have continued that, yes.
Oh, so it's that's what makes you comfortable with your identity. That
Right.
that still reminds you of, I'll move to Marjorie.
Oh, well, I was brought up by an Orthodox mother. So we had separate everything. Although as we grew older, she gave it up. And then we ate everything. Her pork chops were like shoe leather. She just couldn't do it. She made them for my father, but she couldn't do it. So, but when I got married, my husband was not Jewish at the time, so we did not have a kosher household. However, the cooking process was generally kosher. No mixing of dairy and meat, and shellfish was iffy for a special occasion because he loved it. We did have separate dishes for Pesach, and he abided by the rules. He abided by the Passover rules. But it was an interesting upbringing for the children because they knew what was right, they knew what was not so good, and they kept an eye out. Can't do that, Mom. So it was fun. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. And Mark and Sarita from the boat.
Yes, from the boat.
From the boat.
So both the house and the boat are kosher. We have separate dishes, separate pots and pans, all of that. And we only bring kosher meat and kosher poultry aboard, and we don't have any treif come aboard.
I like the expression, there's no treif coming aboard.
Right. Or to the house. And what else would you say? Oh,
Well, Sarita grew up keeping kosher. I came that close to not marrying her because I wanted no part of it. So far, we're working on year 32. And truthfully, I'm not thrilled with it, but I'm doing it out of respect for Sarita, and I do most of the cooking, and so I run the kitchen that way. And since COVID, I have not had the opportunity to go out and eat a lot of things I really like, because we're not going to restaurants or mixing with people. So, yeah, I would love to go out and get a lobster roll for lunch and a dozen clams, but that's not happening till COVID's over. But so
Yeah.
I'm we're keeping it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll eat milchiks out of the house. So if I go to a restaurant, since I've been in business a long time, I'll have dairy or fish.
So the way I phrased the session was also, why do we eat and what do we eat? So, I mean, why do we eat originally? Basics is, well, we need nutrition, right? Our bodies need nutrition. And the food originally was really just to sustain us. But then, of course, as the humans developed, they also developed the taste for certain things and the way of cooking certain things. And by the time the Torah came about, clearly there were so many things that human beings would consume that already Torah states certain laws that prohibit Jews from eating certain things. And it's not necessarily only because of the health concerns. So that's really curious. And it's really mostly, I would say, I mean, the Muslims have their certain restrictions, like they wouldn't eat pork either, right? But I think it's Jews that really have the most restrictions food-wise. Ellen wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering if, and maybe it's just a coincidence, I know a number of rabbis, and a number of them are vegetarians. Is there, some sort of a reason for that, or is just, random?
No, I think it's just it's like Shirley said, for some it's the way to avoid a non-kosher food, and for some it's just their view on life, and I don't know, it's just why so many other people decide to go vegetarian. I mean, some think that Adam and Eve were only vegetarians, and it only they started to consume meat was when they were expelled from heaven. By the way, I'm recording this session, so I know Shirley has to leave earlier, so Shirley can watch the rest. So I want to start sharing. I have 2 articles to share. So I'm going to share the screen, and we don't have that much time, but I hope that we'll be able to go over some of the things. So the first one is eating as a celebration of Jewish life, because for Jews, of course, in the I reiterated many times that, for example, for Russian Jews, Soviet Jews, observing certain holidays was really in a way through the food, which was the only opportunity to express ourselves without being prosecuted, right? So, and for many other Jews, oftentimes we associate the certain foods with certain holidays and certain celebrations. So why are food and meals so essential to Jewish experience? So let's take a few paragraphs, because we really have quite a few materials. So who wants to read this first paragraph?
First comes the Jewish family table, organized for us nearly 2,000 years ago by the rabbis after the temple, the center of Jewish life, was destroyed. At that great moment of crisis, the rabbis transferred the temple in Jerusalem into the Jewish home, moving its rituals, personnel, sacred space, food, blessings, and prayers to the family and the family Shabbat table.
Exactly. So what else happened after the destruction of the Second Temple? What did the rabbis, who, by the way, took over really the lead role in determining the halakha, the Jewish law, after the priests? So what happened after the destruction of Second Temple? The rabbis forbade, in a way of mourning the destruction of Second Temple, they decreed that there's going to be no more sacrifice, right? So up until then, the whole worship, the focus, the main way of worshiping, and in other words, praying to God in a way, was done through sacrifice. But once the temple was destroyed, there was no more of that. And that's why we have majority of the laws, majority of the 613 that came, they were finalized, about 613 commandments. About 3/4 of them, a little bit less, have to do with the laws of the offerings, and how to kill an animal, which animal, when to sacrifice, what time to sacrifice, what the priests have to wear. So believe it or not, majority of those 613 have nothing to do with our daily life, but have to do with the sacrifice. And that's why the Orthodox actually still preserve those laws, and still study those laws, because they think that with the coming of Messiah, the temple will be back functioning, and the ritual of sacrifice will be back. And so we need to still study those laws in case Messiah appears anytime, right? So therefore, afterwards, also the food on the table, Shabbat table, had become more sacred. And in fact, we are talking about always and reminding ourselves to celebrate Shabbat by gathering the family around the table. Okay, maybe Belle, you want to read this one?
As the Talmud says, and now that we no longer have the temple in Jerusalem and its altar to bring about atonement for sin, a person's family table gains reconciliation and forgiveness. Thus, the altar became the family table. Libation wine became Kiddush, consecrating the Sabbath. The kayah, the brass wash basin, became Nitalat Yadamim, hand washing. The Lehem Habam, whatever,
Lechem hapanim.
thank you, show the bread, became challah. Every offering in the temple had salt, and challah is now dipped in salt. And of course, there was the majestic golden menorah, the candelabrum, which now takes its place as Shabbat candles. The priestly blessing is now recited over children by parents who take the place of priests in the temple. Thus can we now say, every home a temple, every family a sanctuary, every table an altar, every meal an offering, every Jew a priest.
Exactly. So in other words, even though, as myself, we have rabbis, right, and cantors, that's Shaliach Tzibur as the representative, but ultimately each person in Judaism is responsible for carrying those traditions. And so, again, the table, the feast for Shabbat or any other celebration, and those symbolic items of foods had become in a way of worshiping. And so we say, even if you don't go to the synagogue, if you observe Shabbat and holidays, you're already a good Jew, right? Ellen, you want to read this next 2 paragraphs?
Sure. In making the Jewish family table and meal the successor to the temple, the rabbis also made Judaism portable. The family table travels with us from Gibraltar to the Indian Ocean, from Afghanistan to Peoria, and from Ottawa to
Damascus.
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 What inspired the rabbis to move temple to home? What in Jewish religious culture have taught the rabbis that the family and its dining table were suited to the task?
Right. We have Mara Newman joining us. So Mara, we have discussed, everyone suggested and shared their level of observing certain ways of kashrut in their household. Do you want to introduce yourself and also share with us what do you do?
Okay. So my name's Mara Newman, and this part will be very short because I have 0 kashrut in my house.
Thanks, Mara.
There you go.
We appreciate your straightforwardness, but no, I mean, to generalize, none of the participants really are strictly kosher. So we're not a judgmental group here. Neither am I, so I didn't share that. I mean, in the household, and we'll read about that, we're trying to keep the kosher style, but I would be completely honest with you from time to time, because the girls, actually mostly because of Abigail, Emily considers herself a conservative Jew.
Really?
Wow.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a separate topic. I think that she'll end up in conservative synagogue. Abigail is quite the opposite. So it's interesting in the same household how 2 kids can be very different, and they go to the same camp. They grow up in the same household, and yet yeah. Anyway, so Mara, also in this article we also talked about the shift from the importance of the offerings, sacrifices during the time of a temple, when priests were in charge of all of that, and so many laws out of 613 were devoted, like majority of them actually, at least almost 3/4 laws were devoted to the rules of sacrifice, and the Orthodox still study them in case Messiah will come. But the shift came about after the ruin of the Second Temple. The traditions and the food celebration, rather celebration through the food or with the food, came to each household. And so various Shabbat ritual items as well as foods had become the focal point, and each person was then now carrying the traditions of the Judaism. Okay, so Mara, since you're on, can you read this paragraph here?
The paragraph that begins in the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
In the Torah, great and important things happen over meals. The first time Abraham arrives in Jerusalem, he has a meal of bread and wine with Malki Tzedek. When Abraham and Sarah enter the covenant and are visited by significant guests, the birth of Isaac is announced over a meal. Then we have what is probably the most important meal in the Torah. On the night before liberation from slavery, God instructs the Jewish people to commemorate the move from slavery to freedom by conducting the Passover Seder with matzah and maror and the Passover lamb.
So special in Passover. Yeah.
So that part I do. I do the sacred act of eating. I do very well.
Nice. So especially with Passover, there's so many distinctive meals that date back, and some had, of course, added up. Like, for example, orange, right? That's much more modern addition. But the Passover lamb, the sacrificial lamb, is still the big part of our Passover plate, right? And if it's not a piece of lamb, it's a shank bone, and if it's not a shank bone, then a chicken. I mean,
or a beet, for vegetarian or skeeved people.
Right. Where in Eastern Europe, in the settlements, in the shtetls, where would they find the lamb, right? The poor Jews. So it was a chicken bone, really.
Mhm.
Rabbi, could I
Yeah.
just interject for a
Oh,
second?
of course.
A midrash that I think I've heard, one of the reasons we have so many food restrictions was way back when we were first starting and accumulating members. I mean, it's very social to go to your neighbor's house and eat whatever they have, and
Right.
it's a very social thing. So perhaps one of the reasons for some of the restrictions was that so we could not do that and sort of isolate ourselves as a
Right.
community.
It's not a midrash. It's actually it's a fact that by preserving and observing the laws of Kashrut, which we'll study in a few minutes, we segregate ourselves and especially our children, because the goal of the elders and the sages and so on and so forth is to preserving the tradition for the future generation, and also to teach the children, of course. And so by limiting ourselves in what we eat is sort of like to also show others and neighbors and to our kids that we're different, right? So very good. Marjorie, do you want to read from, there are several intimate things?
There are several intimate things that people do together: love, play, pray, work, and eat. Animals feed, humans eat. Human beings transform their animal feeding into human eating. Eating is a social task which transforms the biological need into a community of intimacy and shared experience.
That's to Shirley's statement. Okay, read one more paragraph. Marjorie, one more.
People sit down around a table or some other shared space. They face each other. Someone has prepared the food and someone serves the food, and people pass food to each other.
So again, it's in a way by eating, it's not just, and now we talked about, you know, what was the original task of the food, to nourish the body, right? To make sure that we don't die, because we in order for us to continue living, we need to drink and eat. But then gradually, as humans have progressed, also they've developed a certain taste to the food, to the meat, and then, you know, the salt came about, and, you know, started practicing with using various spices, right? So it wasn't just to sustain, but also to pleasure us, and also to bring the family together, as we read. Okay, who didn't go yet? Shirley, do you want to Jewish tradition?
Shirley left.
Oh, sure. Okay, but we're recording, so she'll be able to read. Mark, do you want to read Jewish tradition?
Yeah. Jewish tradition recognizes a meal as a time for intimacy, fellowship, and significant conversation. Kindness is the basic mood of the Jewish meal. People are fed and nourished, and in this intimate setting, people talk with each other and about what matters. That is why the rabbis say that if people eat together and Torah talk is not exchanged, then the meal is a vain enterprise. If eating does not create the opportunity to teach and to learn, then it becomes biological feeding. Because eating creates intimacy amongst people, it creates opportunities for encounters of the intellect and the soul, which must be punished.
So in other words, it's not just, you know, we sit down and quietly we eat. We always promote talking at the table and discussing things. For example, in our household, I would give Tony credit. He always encourages conversation, sharing of the day during the meal. What about your households?
Sure. I mean, I would think that we would all agree that meal times are not just, you know, sitting at the trough and throwing food in our face. It's definitely the social aspect is a huge element, whether it's just my husband and myself, you know, these days, or when in the olden days when we could have people over, you know, communicating, it was a huge aspect of the meals. In our household, not necessarily around Torah discussion, but but feeding the soul and the brain for sure.
Mara, you surprised me. You tell me that you don't discuss Torah.
I know, it's shocking. Just when you think you know somebody.
Anyone else wants to add to that? All right, so we'll move on. Let's see how much left of this article. You know what? I think that we got the idea, right? Of because I want to move on to some actual laws of kashrut. So I'm going to. Can you see this text?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the word kosher, which describes food that meets the standard of kashrut, is also often used to describe ritual objects that are made in accordance with Jewish law and are fit for ritual use, right? So you know, kosher, I don't know, candlesticks or whatever. So, but food that is not kosher is referred to as treif. And Mara, you missed it was really funny when Sarita said that they don't let any treif on board of their boat. That was really great. So the treif literally means torn. Kosher is not a style of cooking, and therefore there is no such thing as a kosher style food. Like I said, you know, my household, they said, oh, it's a kosher style. Well, there is no really such a thing as a kosher style. It's either kosher or not kosher, right?
Right.
Either pregnant or not pregnant. There can be like a little bit pregnant. Any kind of food, Chinese, Mexican, Indian, etc., can be kosher if it is prepared in accordance with Jewish law. And we know, even not in Israel, but in America, in Livingston, I think there's like an Asian kosher restaurant, right? So as long as it's not about what style the food is, but how it is prepared and what ingredients are used in order to prepare it. At the same time, traditional Jewish foods like knishes, bagels, blintzes, and matzah ball soup can all be treif, right? If it's prepared from non-kosher ingredients, you know, you cannot really serve it and present it as a kosher meal to any Jews who follow the strict laws, as long if they don't have a kosher ingredient, or for example, they were in the non-kosher dish that had a milkish, you know, some dairy in it before. However, health is not the main reason for Jewish dietary laws. And we mentioned that before, right, in the beginning. And in fact, many of the laws of kashrut have no known connection with health. To the best of our modern scientific knowledge, there is no reason why, for example, camel or rabbit meat, which are both non-kosher, and we'll explore that in a little bit, is any less healthy than cow or goat milk meat. I mean, that, you know, it's not like we're gonna get poisoned if we eat camel or horse meat, right? In addition, some of the health benefits derived from kashrut were not made obsolete by the refrigerator. For example, there is some evidence that eating meat and dairy together interferes with digestion, and no modern food preparation technique reproduces the health benefit of the kosher law of eating them separately. So here are the fundamental rules of kashrut. So anyone wants to read? From although the details.
Although the details of kashrut are extensive, the laws all derive from a few fairly simple, straightforward rules. Certain animals may not be eaten at all. This restriction includes the flesh, organs, eggs, and milk of the forbidden animals. Of the animals that may be eaten, the birds and mammals must be killed in accordance with Jewish law. All blood must be drained from the meat or broiled out of it before it is eaten.
So in other words, no rare steak for Jews, right? Because no blood should be there. I do love rare though.
Nope. Certain parts of permitted animals may not be eaten. Meat, the flesh of birds and mammals, cannot be eaten with dairy. Fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, and grains can be eaten with either meat or dairy. Of According to some views, fish may not be eaten with meat.
Okay, so I have a funny story about that. Like I said, Emily is, our she's watching over us and making sure that we eat the allowed food, so on and so forth. So one time we had fish. It was just Emily, myself, and Abigail, and I prepared the fish. And Abigail said that she wants milk. And Emily said, Abigail, we can't mix milk with the meat. And Abigail said, where did you see where did you see a fish giving a milk? Yep, that's Abigail.
And who won out on that one?
All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So am I the only one here who does not keep a kosher home?
No,
No,
I don't keep kosher.
I don't keep kosher.
Okay,
So
so
Mara, I told you, don't worry about it.
I'm not worried. I wouldn't have come on if I were worried.
I had shrimp cocktail the other night.
Say that again?
I said I had shrimp cocktail sitting right here the other night.
I wouldn't even discuss my pulled pork sandwich. But anyway, the question I have, and I don't want it to sound judgmental. I choose not to do it. I completely understand the concept of a kosher home. And I think it's awesome that Mark and Sarita have their boat kosher, even before it became like their primary residence. I think there's a consistency there that makes sense to me. I have trouble understanding the concept of keeping a kosher home, but eating non-kosher out of the home. It seems like it should be your body, like what you take in, that's the important thing, and not where it is. And a funny story to me is that my mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, she was an awesome woman. So I mean, no disrespect in this story. She was great. I'm the luckiest person. But she kept a kosher home. And for years and years and years, when my husband and I were just starting out, they had a good deal more means than we, and they treated us all the time. And as we got older and as we got, better situated, we began to want to treat them. And so one time we were down in Florida, we were visiting, it was during Passover, and we wanted to take them out to dinner. And they're like, no, you can't eat dinner out. And we're saying, well, sure because they didn't eat kosher out. I said, sure you can, we can go to a steak place. We can go to a fish place. You get potato, you don't get pasta. You ask them not to bring the bread. It's actually quite easy to eat, kosher style, to not eat treif out. And I mean, we really had a twist there. We really want to treat you. We're only here. We go out. What do you think they order? Lobster.
and it was Passover?
Yes.
Wow.
I don't understand that. I don't understand.
So Mara, some people continue to keep a kosher home because of the family members or friends who they may anticipate come to their house and would only eat if their household is kosher.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I believe Marsh and Stan Saltz, right? They have
Yes.
A daughter who is Orthodox. And so I bet that, they keep kosher because they want to be able to host their family members.
Oh, did they switch over after their daughter married?
I need to ask them. I'm not certain. I'm just,
okay. That's interesting.
I'm guessing.
That's interesting to make your house
yes,
acceptable to the people you want to be hosting. All right, I get that.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a typical reason.
They can't.
No, I hear what you're saying, and for me too, it's it's strange. But again, once you deviate from the strict observancy, and although within Orthodox too, I mean, they're using Shabbos Goy to turn on the oven if they need, or light. So like, hello, it's still not kosher, but whatever. It's really what each person is comfortable with, identifying oneself as a Jew. So
Mhm.
for some people, it's to observe all the way through and not eat out. For some people, they say, well, at least my house, I'm showing to my neighbors and my friends that I'm a Jew by observing, you know. So it's really your own level of keeping it, you know,
Mhm.
for you to know that you're a Jew.
Right.
Or like I said, you know, having it accessible for other family members or friends. Okay, so Belle, can you finish the 6 and 7?
Utensils that have come into contact with meat may not be used with dairy and vice versa. Utensils that have come into contact with non-kosher food may not be used with kosher food. This applies only where the contact occurred where the food was hot. That's weird.
Yeah. So in the, by the way, in the modern interpretation of the law, there's a lot about if you put in a microwave a certain amount of
Right.
time, that kosherize the dish, or, you know, if you boil afterwards in a pot for a certain amount of time. We're not going to get into that, but there are
Yeah.
ways of there are ways of going around it. And the last one.
Grape products made by non-Jews may not be eaten.
So in other words, we're talking about the wine, right? So what does make a wine kosher? Really, a wine that is made by Jews, not like if you watched Frasier, remember Frasier?
Yeah.
There was an episode where Niles brings his girlfriend, right? And her mother is coming in. So they're trying to impress her and serve the kosher wine. Do you remember what they did?
No.
They put, Frasier put sugar in a glass of red wine because
To make it taste like Manischewitz.
Exactly. To make it taste just like Manischewitz. My mother is like totally disgusted by that by that wine. It's my favorite episode of Frasier.
But you know, it's a very interesting talking about this. I worked for Federation and we did a lot of big events and everything was kosher. And this brings back a memory of one of the events that we had where we had a wine distributor come in and we were serving his wine. And he insisted that the only person that opened the bottles of wine had to be an observant male.
Really? Interesting.
Oh,
Otherwise, it made the wine not kosher. And
no, that's chauvinistic. No.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. First of all, I remember, you know, having a whole discussion with him over this. But then a couple of my friends said, well, I could understand if you're insisting only a Jew, but come on.
Yeah, no, that was over the top. Well, so again, the wine is made the same way as any wine in a Jewish winery. It's just as long as it's made and produced by Jews. So that's what makes it kosher. Yeah. Okay, animals that cannot be eaten. Now we're getting into the real stuff, right?
Yeah.
So who wants to read the first paragraph? Should I call out? How about, oh, Mark didn't go at all. Mark, do you want to read? Are you not so much?
I think maybe Sarita's going to help me out.
Sarita, fine. Go ahead, Sarita.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Of the beasts of the earth, which basically refers to land mammals with the exception of swarming rodents, you may eat any animal that has cloven hooves and chews its cud.
That, I mean, pretty simple, right? So name me the animals who have cloven hooves and chew the cud.
Cows.
Cows.
Deer.
Do they chew cud?
I believe that deer is kosher as long as it's slaughtered kosher.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Goat.
Yes, the goat, right? So sheep, goat, right? They all do. And so, but then, sorry to continue.
Leviticus 11:3.
Yeah,
Deuteronomy-
it's mentioned. It's mentioned in the Torah in Leviticus 11. So in other words, it's a Torah-itic law, right? So it's not something that rabbis came up with. It is directly derived from the Torah. Okay.
Any land mammal that does not have both of these qualities is forbidden. The Torah specifies that the camel, the rock badger, the hare, and the pig are not kosher because each lacks one of these two qualifications. Sheep, cattle, goats, and deer are kosher.
So Mark is correct. Rabbit, right, would not be kosher, although I personally find that meat, if prepared well, delicious, but it is not kosher. Sarita, can you read one more?
Okay. Of the things that are in the waters, you may eat anything that has fins and scales.
So that is very important to remember. Fin, scales, and also a tail. So for example, don't look at, for example, the catfish, would it be kosher?
I don't think it has scales, does it?
No, actually doesn't. It's like it's pretty slick. It doesn't have scales. It has fins, but it doesn't have scales. What about the eel? No. So when we go for Japanese, eel is not kosher. Doesn't have scale, doesn't have a tail, and doesn't have fins, right? So that's selfish, Sarita.
Okay, where am I?
In that's shellfish.
Oh, thus shellfish such as lobsters, oysters, shrimp, clams, and crabs are all forbidden. Fish like tuna, carp, salmon, and herring are all permitted.
So in the Torah also it mentions, when we see it, Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 again, it also mentions that the bottom feeders, not only the presence of scales, tail, and fins is important, but also all those seafood animals, I mean sea animals, water animals, they are bottom feeders. And I would say, even though we read that has nothing to do with the health, but nevertheless, even though nowadays, of course, we're very careful how we're preparing the shellfish, but they're bottom feeders. What does it mean? They eat garbage. And it's very easy to get poisoned from that sort of fish because if it's not cleaned properly. For example, I got horrible food poisoning when Tony and I traveled, when we were just dating, to Brazil. And it's known, you can actually read it in any travel guide. In Rio de Janeiro, because of the way of preparation, you can easily get poisoned if you eat shellfish. So I think that it does have to do with health here. I mean, in the ancient times, but again, it just has to be cleaned properly if you decide to eat this non-kosher seafood. For birds, Marjorie, can you read for birds?
For birds, the criteria is less clear. The Torah lists forbidden birds, but does not specify why these particular birds are forbidden. All of the birds on the list are birds of prey or scavengers. Thus, the rabbis inferred that this was the basis for the distinction. Other birds are permitted, such as chicken, geese, ducks, and turkeys.
So in other words, domestic birds that are not prey birds. So pretty much all the prey birds are forbidden. But it's a pretty vague description. So it's really hard to say if falcon, I think. Not falcon. I forgot. There's a
hawk.
No, the bird that is actually served. Sometimes you have it in the Indian restaurants. It's not big. It's not a big bird.
Pigeon?
No. Hold on. Let me Google, because I know a Russian name for it. Oh, Mara, just saw your text. Hold on. A pheasant, Pheasant. So it's sort of like a border. There's no, we can't really claim that it's a prey bird, so it's like on a border. Okay, and Marjorie, can you finish?
Me?
Uh-huh.
As mentioned above, any product derived from these forbidden animals, such as their milk, eggs, fat, or organs, also cannot be eaten. Rennet, an enzyme used to harden cheese, is often obtained from non-kosher animals. Thus, kosher hard cheese can be difficult to find.
Right. By the way, if let's say you're like kosher style, and you say, well, I can have a chicken sausage, but be very careful to read ingredients because the chicken sausage may be wrapped, that phlegm, right, around it is derived from
Pig.
from pork.
Intestine.
Or also if you use Jello, sometimes in the Jello there are some pork elements, right? So you have
Gelatin is, a lot of time gelatin is used from horse.
Yeah. Okay, so now the important part also, and the questionable part, is separation of meat and dairy, which is very clear supposedly in the Torah, but then had really been expanded by the rabbis throughout the centuries. And it's interesting how now we perceive the importance of separation between the milk and the meat and the dairy. So we have just 2 paragraphs left. Anyone wants to finish this topic here? And then I'll have more on that.
On 3 separate occasions, the Torah tells us not to boil a kid in its mother's milk.
I mean, that's basic Torahitic law. That's the only thing really that we read about separation of meat and dairy in the Torah. That's it. It doesn't, right? It doesn't say you can't cook the cow itself in the milk.
Right.
It doesn't say you can't cook chicken with a cheese, right? That's it. The only thing that we hear is boil a kid in its mother's milk, nothing else. Okay, keep going.
The oral Torah.
What is the oral? So the oral Torah meaning interpretation of the rabbis, their interpretation of the law. Go ahead.
Explains that this passage prohibits eating meat and dairy together. But that means it's their interpretation.
Exactly.
The rabbi.
Can you let me stop you for a second?
Go ahead.
Have you heard of a Karaites? The Jews that call themselves Karaites.
No.
Maybe one day we'll explore. It's fascinating actually, their traditions, and there is a still group of Jews. They call themselves Karaites. They live in Israel, so they follow strictly only the laws of Torah. Nothing that came after, was interpreted by the rabbis, not Mishneh Torah, not Talmud, nothing. They say we're only observe the laws of the Torah. So the Karaites are still only stick to what the Torah says. That's it. Okay. Yeah, go on. The rabbis extended.
The rabbis extended this prohibition to include not eating milk and poultry together.
Again, it was nothing like that in the Torah, right? Came about later. Mm-hmm.
It is, however, permissible to eat fish and dairy together, and it is quite common.
And I told you the story about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is also permissible to eat dairy and eggs together. According to some views, it is not permissible to eat meat and fish together, but I am not certain of the reason for that restriction.
So they are right over the article. By the way, when you go to observant house where there's a brit performed, or anywhere like a celebration of bris, right? What kind of meal do they serve? It's usually takes place in the morning.
Dairy.
Dairy, eggs, lox, so they're all served together, right? So
Yeah.
it's all fine. So in other words, fish is fine. Okay,
Um,
gotta go on.
This separation includes not only the foods themselves, but the utensils, pots, and pans with which they are cooked, the plates and flatware from which they are eaten, the dishwashers or dishpans in which they are cleaned, and the towels on which they are dried. A kosher household will have at least 2 sets of pots, pans, and dishes, one for meat and one for dairy.
Right, and then the separation in terms of the time, right? So
Right.
without reading, I'll just tell you. So there has to be a certain time that passes between eating the meat and the dairy. More observant Jews would count 6 hours, and that's because supposedly in your palate, in your mouth, there is still some remnants of some of the food that you had consumed before, unless you brush your teeth after each meal. So that in your mouth it doesn't mix together. But also they say, some say for health reasons. Okay, now let's look into more detailed description why we have to, why was there the law of separation, the milk and dairy. This was a really cute article. So. Okay, why chicken and cheese became prohibited? Because that's the big question, right? For us, not so much observant Jews, it's like, come on, why can't I have chicken parm, right? It's chicken is not mentioned in the Torah in terms of not mixing with the milk. So it's a long article. Let's see, I think another 15 minutes. It's just there's some fascinating examples from the Talmud text and so on and so forth. So are we okay with reading, or are we getting a little tired from reading?
Fine.
You're fine? Okay. Ellen, you want to start this?
Sure. One of the most well-known kosher laws is the prohibition of consuming meat and milk products together. While the story of how the rabbis came to forbid consumption of a beef and cheese hamburger has been told in detail, a part of this tale is less known. How did the rabbis come to forbid consumption of a chicken and cheeseburgers? To answer this question begins in Deuteronomy 14:21, where for the third time the Torah commands,
do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. So we already learned that. Keep going.
Okay. While it was important enough command to repeat verbatim 3 times in the Hebrew Bible, the precise meaning of this phrasing is unclear and was the subject of much debate in antiquity and beyond. In what follows, I discuss only some ancient Jewish interpretations of how the biblical prohibition was understood and put into practice in both the kitchen and the table.
So it's very interesting how this person who writes the article, what's his name? Let's see, Dr. Jordan Rosenblum. So he starts with philosophy and the Jewish philosopher Philo. Let's see, Mara, you want to read Philo's literal interpretation?
Sure. In the Second Temple period, we have evidence that at least one Jew, the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, understood this biblical injunction literally, i.e., a prohibition to boil a baby animal in its own mother's milk, and saw in it a lesson in ethics. Philo argued that it is so easy to avoid eating the meat of a baby animal with milk that literally comes from the udder from which it is nursed, that only cruel people with no sense of compassion would go out of their way to do this. Should I continue or not?
Yep, read that whole part.
Okay. It was grossly improper that the substance which fed the living animal should be used to season and flavor the same after its death, and that while nature provided for its conservation by creating the stream of milk and ordaining that it should pass through the mother's breast as as through conduits, the license of man should rise to such a height as to misuse what had sustained its life to destroy also the body which remains in existence. If indeed anyone thinks good to boil flesh in milk, let him do so without cruelty and keeping clear of impiety. Everywhere there are herds of cattle innumerable, which are milked every day by cowherds, goatherds, and shepherds, whose chief source of income as cattle rearers is milk, sometimes liquid and sometimes condensed and coagulated into cheese. And since milk is so abundant, the person who boils the flesh of lambs or kids or any other young animals in their mother's milk shows himself cruelly brutal in character and gilded of compassion, that most vital of emotions and most nearly akin to this rational soul. So according to Philo, if you were to cook meat from a baby animal in milk that comes from another mother, then that would not violate this taboo and would be kosher. Philo could not have possibly meant to include fowl in this prohibition, since mother birds do not produce milk.
So again, this phrase, like everything else in the Torah, it's up to interpretation, right?
Right.
And he interpreted it in a totally different way than the rabbis would. All meat is forbidden to be cooked with milk. Okay. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So if it's cruel to have, and I see the point, to specifically have milk from its own mother together,
Right.
what do you think the idea of chicken in an omelet? Well, that's the mother and the offspring.
You mean like a chicken sausage with an omelet?
Well, I mean, there are like Mexican dishes that have chicken.
Well, according to Philo, as long as the chicken is not the same that produced that egg that you're cooking, it's okay.
No, but I don't think he is saying that. I think he's saying, not you're my mother, mothers or aunts. I mean, I think he's saying, or I interpreted it as goats and goat milk, sheep and sheep milk.
No, I know, but he's saying, if it's not the kid, or if it's not the milk from the cow whose kid was killed, but a different kid, then it's okay.
I actually didn't interpret it that way.
Oh, so
I interpreted it as a different species.
It's
more likely that your interpretation is correct on a
I don't know. We can go back and read it again.
Mine would be.
But no, I can see a point. I'm sure we can find somewhere the discussion about that. That's a very good question. That is a very good question.
It always struck me as a little creepy. Chicken and eggs together.
Chicken and eggs together. I don't think I've ever had that. I don't like sausage with my omelet. Either chicken or any other. But yeah, I can see a point. I don't recall any discussion on that, but I can dig.
But anyway, I digress. Go ahead.
No. Sorry, who was reading the Rabbi's Advance?
I was, but I'm done.
Okay. Marjorie, can you read the Rabbi's Advance? A very different.
The rabbis advance a very different interpretation. For them, the law is not specific, but general. All meat cannot be cooked with all milk. Further, the move from specific to general meant that they also consider this as a prohibition against eating, not just boiling the meat and milk together. Hence, it regulates both kitchen practice and table practice.
In Hulin it's a Talmud. Okay, so the first one.
Meat.
Uh-huh.
All meat is forbidden to be cooked with milk, except for the meat of fish and locusts. You can eat locusts.
Locusts are kosher. Yeah. Did we read about the insects, or did we skip that? So
you skipped it.
Oh, okay. My apologies. So some insects such as locusts, and if you're friends with me on the Facebook, I recently reposted Abigail eating locusts that we got a package at Universal Studios, and they were very crunchy. So locusts are kosher, believe it or not.
Okay. And it is forbidden to bring it up with cheese on the table except from the meat of fish and locusts.
Right. Keep going.
When discussing cooking in the kitchen, the text refers to milk. But then when it turns to eating at the table, cheese is the milk to which it refers. Cheese, a coagulated dairy product, was the most common form in which milk was consumed in the ancient world. This move from milk to cheese highlights the fact that the rabbis read Deuteronomy and related texts as a general law. All milk and all milk products are forbidden to be cooked and or consumed with all meat.
So, I mean, that is quite a deviation, right, from the statement of the Torah that the kid shouldn't be cooked in the milk of its mother. So they're saying, you know, they're making it they're making our life more difficult. Those rabbis, they're like, all meat and all milk cannot be cooked together. So full may go up with cheese on the table, but it may not be eaten. That's from Hudin also. May not be eaten. The words of the house of Shammai. So in other words, you can have on the table both cheese and the meat, but you just can't eat them together.
But oh, you mean so they could be at the table, but if I chose to just eat the cheese,
One or the
I'd be
other.
okay,
One or
and
the other.
eat the meat.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's not like, oh my God, you know, there's a lobster as a centerpiece. No, it's not going to be viewed as that. You know what I mean? So
Buffet style kashrut.
But then what about the dishes and the utensils?
But I think that's because back then it wasn't developed so much yet,
Okay.
you know, and it's a different dish. So in other words, at the time they use different dish for one or the other, but it's okay to put it together on the same table. I mean, if you think about it, it's not like they touch.
Right.
Again, all of the more modern interpretation I'm talking about, you know, from 100 years ago, is it's all about, and I think that you know, I'll just finish with that statement because there's much more. If you want, I can send you this article. It's a really great article. The later interpretation, I'll stop sharing. The later interpretation really all came about so that we can be more careful and avoid all the either temptation or a mistake of mixing. So that's what really it is about. And I believe it's around the time of Rashi when the rabbis declare that, you know, we're not, if not him, Rashi himself, in order to avoid the mix-up, let's just say we're not mixing chicken with the milk because sometimes chicken may look too much like the meat, the beef, you know, any other meat. Anyway, so look, it's, you know, if you're a Karaite and you only follow the Toraitic law, then you may not be so far from the kashrut. Also, if you read in terms of the punishment, you know, oh my God, what happens if I eat the non-kosher food, right? You may wonder, because I bet in the back of your mind, you have the Jewish guilt there and like, maybe I haven't done the right thing. Maybe I just had this, you know, a piece of shellfish or a pork. Probably I shouldn't have done that. I mean, most of us have that back of a mind kind of thing. So I don't have the specific verse for you. And if you want, I will search. But basically, all you do is you cleanse yourself for a week. Like you know, you take a shower, you don't eat anything like that. And you maybe bring a sacrifice and you're okay. It's not like it's punished by death or anything, okay?
It's an easy penance. It almost sounds like it's worth it.
Exactly. Well, I don't know, Mara. Depends how it's cooked.
I remember when I was a little girl And I went to a friend's house and they had meat and milk at the table. And I don't remember if I ate it. I don't remember that part, but I remember coming home and I said to my mother, they had meat and milk. How come we don't, you know? And she said something like, well, we're Jewish. We don't do that, you know? And I like, well, why not? You know, why can't we? Because that's what I saw, you know, but I knew in our house, we didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't permitted.
Yeah. We had a phase when Tony and I were much more, I see some messages, so we don't give question. So we were, I think we were in Costa Rica, and we were still, like Tony and I were trying to really stay away from all the shellfish. And so we wouldn't order anything on the menu that was shellfish, but Abigail insisted on having the shrimp, and we said, you can't. Why can't I? Because you're Jewish. Well, how do you know I'm Jewish? Well, because I'm Jewish. It's just a given. You're Jewish. Well, but what if I marry a non-Jew? Then I can have a shellfish, said Abigail when she was 7.
And, you know, somebody made the comment about, you know, eating, I think Mara did, eating kosher at home, but then going out. Well, my mother ate out. I mean, we weren't kosher, but it was, I guess it was this certain, you know, this is the way it's done, so we're doing it. But out, it was very different. I mean, she ate all sorts of things that I was shocked, you know, but at home, you didn't do that. That was the way that we were brought up.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something you may have not known before. I don't know. And again, if you want, I can send you this article. Yeah,
I want
Marcia?
it. I want the article.
Yeah, that would be
All
great.
right, so I'll
Thank
send
you.
you. I think I have everybody's email, so I'll send that article. If I thought it was really great. I mean, out of all articles, really, also with a little bit of sense of humor. So it was very, very good, and good sources in it too. So if anybody else wants to add, I would be happy to hear. Otherwise,
I just have a question because I can't recall. In the very beginning, you made a statement about Adam and Eve being vegetarians.
Yeah.
How do we know that?
Well, it says that they ate from the
tree,
the garden, from the tree, the vegetation. It didn't say anything about them killing animals. The animals were just like walking around free in the heaven, on the Garden of Eden. But then once they were expelled, there's a mention that Adam started hunting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. This was very good, Inna. Thank you.
I'm so happy you enjoyed, and I'm glad that I was able to do it today. So
Yes.
awesome.
Awesome.
Yep.
So
All
thank
right,
you.
have a wonderful rest of Sunday, and you definitely made my day. So maybe you'll join me for a next one. I need to think of a next topic.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Well,
Thank you
Ina.
so much.
Thank you.
Nice meeting everybody.
Enjoy your
Okay.
locusts, everybody.